Stop pretending you can afford this place. My father-in-law Richard grabbed the $800 check from my hands before I could reach for my wallet, his voice carrying that particular condescension he reserved exclusively for me. You're embarrassing yourself and my daughter. Let someone who actually has money handle this. My wife Diana looked away, her cheeks flushing with the familiar embarrassment that accompanied every family gathering, while her mother Constance nodded approvingly at her husband's generosity. But why did I simply shrug and say, okay, letting Richard take the check with his triumphant smile, and why did the restaurant manager approach our table 8 minutes later with an expression of barely concealed alarm? Mr. Harrison? I apologize for the interruption, but the owner needs to see you. There's a problem with your card. Richard's confident expression flickered. A problem? What kind of problem? The card has been declined, sir. The owner would like to discuss the matter privately. If you'd follow me? The table went silent. I reached for my wine glass to hide my smile. Because I'd opened this restaurant last year. Richard Harrison had been dismissing me for 8 years. From the moment Diana brought me home to meet her parents, he'd made his assessment clear: I wasn't good enough for his daughter. Not wealthy enough, not established enough, not impressive enough to join the Harrison family's carefully curated social circle. What do you do again? He'd asked at that first dinner. I'm in hospitality. Restaurant management. A waiter. Restaurant management. I oversee operations. My daughter dates a waiter. He turned to his wife. Constance, our Princeton-educated daughter is dating a waiter. I wasn't a waiter. I'd never been a waiter. But Richard had decided what I was in that first 5 minutes, and no evidence had changed his mind in 8 years. The truth was considerably more complicated. I'd started in the restaurant industry at 16, working as a dishwasher in my uncle's struggling diner. By 20, I was managing that diner. By 25, I bought it from my uncle and transformed it into a profitable breakfast spot that became a neighborhood institution. By 30, I owned 3 restaurants. By 35, I was developing a hospitality group that would eventually include 7 properties across the metropolitan area. The restaurant where Richard had just been declined, Meridian, was my crown jewel. A fine dining establishment that had received a Michelin star within 8 months of opening. A place where reservations were booked 3 months in advance, where celebrities and executives competed for the best tables, where an $800 dinner for 4 was actually a modest order. Richard had chosen this restaurant specifically because it was exclusive, expensive, and, in his mind, far beyond anything I could possibly afford. He had no idea he was eating in my building. Diana knew about my business success. She was the only Harrison who did. We met at one of my restaurants 6 years before our relationship started. She'd been celebrating a promotion with friends, I'd been checking on operations, and something had clicked between us. We'd talked for 2 hours after her friends left, exchanged numbers, and slowly built a relationship that existed entirely outside her family's awareness. By the time she brought me home to meet her parents, we'd already been dating for 8 months. She'd warned me about her father. He's going to judge you. He judges everyone. Just, don't take it personally. What should I tell him about my work? The truth. You're in restaurant management. That's not exactly the full truth. It's true enough. If you tell him you own a hospitality group, he'll spend the whole dinner interrogating you about your net worth. She'd sighed. Let him underestimate you. It's easier. So I had. For 8 years, I'd let Richard believe I was a glorified waiter who, somehow convinced his daughter to marry beneath her. I'd tolerated his comments about my limited prospects, his suggestions that Diana deserved better, his constant reminders that I was present only because his daughter had made a regrettable choice. I'd tolerated it because fighting him would have required revealing everything, and revealing everything would have changed our relationship in ways I didn't want. I wanted Diana to love me for myself, not for my bank account. I wanted to know our marriage was real, not influenced by her family's attitudes about wealth. But 8 years of tolerance had built up considerable pressure. Tonight, that pressure would find release. The dinner had been Richard's idea. He'd been bragging about Meridian for weeks, how exclusive it was, how difficult reservations were to obtain, how he'd pulled strings to get a table for his daughter's anniversary dinner. I want to take you somewhere special, he'd told Diana. Somewhere your husband couldn't possibly take you himself. The irony was exquisite. My staff had recognized me the moment we walked in. I'd made brief eye contact with the general manager, Anthony, and given a subtle shake of my head. He'd understood immediately. I didn't want special treatment, didn't want the family to know my connection to the restaurant. At least not yet. The dinner had proceeded with familiar patterns. Richard had ordered the most expensive items on the menu, commenting loudly about the prices as if to remind everyone of his generosity. Constance had critiqued the decor, the service, the other diners, finding herself superior to everyone and everything as usual. Not bad, Richard had pronounced after the main course. Though I've had better in Paris. The chef trained in Lyon, I offered. How would you know that? It's mentioned on the website. He'd snorted. Research the place to make yourself feel part of our world. That's almost endearing. Diana had squeezed my hand under the table. 8 years of these comments, and she still tried to offer silent support. When the check arrived, I'd reached for it automatically, my restaurant, my money, my meal. But Richard had been faster, snatching it with the theatrical gesture of a man proving a point. $800? Please. You'd have to work for months to afford this. I can cover it. With what? Your tips. He'd laughed at his own joke. Stop pretending, son. Let the adults handle real expenses. I'd let him take the check deliberately. Not because I couldn't afford it, I could have bought the entire restaurant with the money in my checking account. But because I'd known what would happen when he tried to pay. Richard Harrison's financial situation was considerably less stable than he pretended. The Harrison family wealth, inherited 3 generations ago, had been steadily depleted by poor investments, expensive lifestyles, and an inability to generate new income. Richard lived primarily on credit, maintaining appearances while his actual net worth diminished annually. I knew this because I'd had him researched years ago, not out of malice, but out of curiosity about the family I was marrying into. The report had been illuminating. Richard's primary credit card had a limit of $25,000. His balance typically ran around $22,000. A charge of $800 might or might not clear, depending on timing. Tonight, it wouldn't clear. Because I'd arranged for Meridian to process his card through a system that required additional authorization for amounts over $500, a system designed to flag potentially fraudulent transactions. His card wasn't actually declined. It was merely flagged. But the result was the same: a manager would need to speak with him about the problem. And the owner would need to be involved. Anthony approached with perfect professionalism. Mr. Harrison, if you'd follow me? The owner would like to speak with you about the card situation. Richard's confident demeanor showed the first cracks. The owner? Why? Standard procedure for flagged transactions, sir. Nothing to be concerned about. Right this way. I stood. I'll come too. That's not necessary, Richard started. I insist. Family supports family, right? The walk to the back office took approximately 45 seconds. 45 seconds during which Richard grew increasingly nervous, Constance grew increasingly indignant, and Diana gave me a look that suggested she knew something was happening but wasn't sure what. The back office was mine. My desk, my computer, my framed photograph of Diana and me at our wedding. Richard wouldn't recognize the setting. He'd never asked about my life enough to know what my office looked like. I sat behind the desk. What are you doing? Richard demanded. Taking my seat. This is the owner's office. Yes, it is. I gestured to the chair across from me. Please sit down, Richard. The realization dawned slowly. I watched it cross his face in stages: confusion, disbelief, denial, and finally something approaching understanding. You? You own this restaurant? I own 7 restaurants. This is just the flagship property. That's impossible. You're a waiter. I've never been a waiter. I told you I was in restaurant management. You decided to hear waiter because that fit your assumptions about me. Diana had followed us in. Her expression was unreadable. I own Meridian Hospitality Group. Meridian, where we're currently sitting. Harborview Grill. Catalyst. Urban Harvest. 3 other properties that probably aren't famous enough to have reached your social circle. I leaned back. Your card was flagged, by the way. It's not actually declined, the charge will process normally. But I wanted an excuse to have this conversation. Richard's face cycled through colors. You've been lying to us for years. I've never lied. I told you exactly what I do. You never asked follow-up questions. You decided I wasn't worth understanding, so you didn't try to understand me. If you own all these restaurants, why didn't you say something? Why let us believe? Why did you believe it in the first place? Because I didn't wear expensive enough clothes? Because I didn't drive the right car? Because I didn't drop my net worth into casual conversation? I shook my head. You made assumptions based on snobbery rather than evidence. I simply didn't correct them. But you let me pay for things. Let me condescend to you, I let you reveal who you are. Every time you grabbed a check, every time you made comments about my limited prospects, every time you suggested Diana had married beneath her, you were showing me exactly what kind of person you are. Diana spoke for the first time. How long have you owned this restaurant? 14 months. It opened about 8 months before your father started bragging about getting reservations here. And you never told me? I told you about the restaurant. I told you it was doing well. I didn't specifically mention that your father had chosen my flagship property to demonstrate his superiority over me. I smiled slightly. The universe has a sense of humor. This is humiliating, Constance interjected. Richard, we're leaving. Your dinner hasn't been paid for yet. And before you try to use another card, I should mention that I've seen your husband's financial records. I'm not sure any of his cards will clear $800 tonight. The silence was devastating. You investigated us? Richard demanded. Years ago. When I was deciding whether to marry into your family, I wanted to understand what I was getting into. The picture was illuminating. That's a violation of privacy. It's public record research. Anyone can access the same information I found. Your credit problems, your declining investment portfolio, the second mortgage on your house that you haven't told Constance about. Constance turned to her husband. Second mortgage? He's lying. I'm not lying. The documentation is available to anyone who knows where to look. You've been maintaining appearances while your actual financial situation has been deteriorating for years. I stood. The Harrison family wealth isn't really wealth anymore, is it? It's the memory of wealth. The habits of wealth. The social expectations of wealth. But the actual money is mostly gone. Richard had nothing to say. Meanwhile, you've spent 8 years telling me I wasn't good enough for your daughter because you assumed I had less money than you. You didn't know what I had, you just assumed that anyone who wasn't obviously wealthy must be poor. The conversation that followed was difficult. Constance was devastated to learn about the family's actual financial situation, the debts, the declining investments, the careful management of appearances that had hidden reality from even her. Diana was processing the revelation that both her father and her husband had been keeping significant secrets from her. And Richard was confronting something he never anticipated, being financially surpassed by the son-in-law he dismissed as beneath his family's standards. The $800 dinner is on me, I said finally. Not because I need to prove anything to you, but because this is my restaurant and I don't charge family. We're not family, Richard said coldly. We have been for 8 years. You just didn't want to acknowledge it. I walked to the door. One more thing. The reservation you pulled strings to get? There's always a table available for me. I asked Anthony to hold one when I heard you were planning to bring us here. Your strings were just my staff being polite about letting you think you'd accomplished something. The drive home was quiet. Diana didn't speak until we'd been on the road for 15 minutes. You should have told me. About the restaurant? About all of it. The investigation into my parents. The real extent of your business. The fact that my father's been humiliating himself in your establishment. I was trying to let you have a genuine relationship with your family without money complicating things. And you thought keeping secrets was better than honesty? I paused, considering how to explain 8 years of decisions. Your father decided I was worthless the moment he met me. Nothing I said would have changed his mind. If I'd told him about my success, he would have accused me of lying, or dismissed it as exaggeration, or found some other way to diminish me. The only thing that would convince him was evidence he couldn't deny. So tonight was planned? Tonight was opportunity. He chose my restaurant. He grabbed the check. He created the perfect situation for the truth to emerge. I just facilitated it. Diana was silent for another mile. I need time to process this. All of it. I understand. You've been playing a character for 8 years. The humble restaurant manager who tolerates my family's contempt. That's not who you actually are. It's part of who I am. The humility is real. The tolerance was a choice. The only character I played was the one your father wanted to see. And who do you actually want to be? Your husband. The person who builds things, creates opportunities, makes spaces where people can celebrate important moments. The person who loves you regardless of what your family thinks of me. She reached across and took my hand. I wish you'd trusted me with the truth sooner. I wish your father had been worth telling the truth to. But he wasn't. He made his judgments based on assumptions, never evidence. People who think that way don't change when you provide evidence, they just find new ways to dismiss it. The fallout with her parents took months to resolve. Richard never apologized. He couldn't admit he'd been wrong about me for 8 years, couldn't acknowledge that his inferior son-in-law had built a business empire while his own family's wealth evaporated. He retreated into cold politeness, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary. Constance was more adaptable. Once she understood the family's actual financial situation, and the implications for their lifestyle, she became considerably more interested in maintaining a relationship with the son-in-law who actually had money. You could invest in some of Richard's ventures, she suggested once. Help stabilize our situation. I could. But I won't. Your husband has spent 8 years treating me like I was beneath him. I'm not going to reward that behavior by bailing him out. That's petty. That's consequences. Richard can stabilize his own situation. I built my business without his help, he can rebuild his without mine. Diana and I worked through our issues with time and communication. She'd felt blindsided by the revelations, both about me and about her parents. We spent months in honest conversations, revealing the things we'd each kept hidden, building a transparency that should have existed from the beginning. "I don't need your money," she told me once. "I never did." "I know. That's why I didn't tell you about it." But secrets corrode relationships. Even well-intentioned ones. "You're right. I thought I was protecting something, our authenticity, your relationship with your family, something. Instead, I was just delaying an inevitable reckoning." No more secrets? No more secrets. Meridian continues to thrive. 3 years after that dinner, we received our second Michelin star. The restaurant is booked solid, the hospitality group has expanded to 11 properties, and the business I built through decades of work continues growing. Richard Harrison still comes to dinner occasionally, always on someone else's reservation, always slightly uncomfortable knowing whose establishment he's patronizing. He never orders the most expensive items anymore. I comp his meals anyway. Not out of generosity, out of something more complicated. A reminder, perhaps, that the son-in-law he dismissed can afford to be magnanimous in ways Richard never could. "Stop pretending you can afford this place." Those words hang in my memory, a perfect encapsulation of everything Richard got wrong. He saw what he expected to see, a working-class man reaching above his station, and never looked deeper. The owner of the restaurant was sitting right beside him. The person who could have made his family's financial problems disappear was enduring his contempt in silence. The man he considered inferior had been successfully, quietly, dramatically more successful than he'd ever been. Sophie, our daughter, is 5 now. She'll grow up knowing both her grandfathers, Richard with his faded pretensions, my own father with his working-class pride. She'll learn that wealth doesn't determine worth, that assumptions based on appearance are usually wrong, and that the quiet person in the corner might be the most powerful person in the room. "Grandpa Richard says we're lucky Daddy has such a good job," she reported recently. "What do you think?" "I think Grandpa Richard is kind of silly. He acts like having money is the most important thing. But you always say that making people happy is more important." "That's right. Is that why you make restaurants? To make people happy?" "That's exactly why." She nodded with 5-year-old wisdom. "Good. I like that better than what Grandpa Richard thinks." "So do I." He grabbed the check because he couldn't imagine I could afford it. He dismissed me for 8 years because he couldn't imagine I was worth respecting. He chose my restaurant, my flagship property, to demonstrate his superiority over the son-in-law he'd never bothered to understand. And when the manager told him the owner needed to see him, he had no idea he was about to sit across from the man he spent nearly a decade belittling. $800. That's what he thought separated us. In reality, I'd built something worth $47 million while he watched his family's inherited wealth disappear. He saw a waiter. I saw someone who'd never learned that assumptions are the enemy of understanding. The check was on me that night. It always had been. He just never knew it.